crossed the Simpson Strait. Chewbacca named this place Starvation Cove because that's where, like, he followed their trek and he knows they made it to there, and that's where
the end of them came.
They all died.
Yeah.
Hence the name Starvation Cove.
I can. Well, how did they die? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, the natives had disinterred many graves to plunder them, which you can't blame them. There's nothing out there. So they come across this pile of rocks because they didn't dig. I mean, it's permafrost.
You can't.
You dig down a couple inches and it's not dirt, it's gravel.
Right.
And then it's permafrost, which is like cement. And you can't dig into that.
Cover them.
You just cover them with the rocks.
Like make a tomb, kind of.
Basically just try to keep it so the animals don't eat them. But then the natives are like, well, see what's in here.
Yeah, why not?
Finding all kinds of buttons and clothes. And they didn't cover they treated their dead differently.
Yeah, it wasn't part of their culture to be like...
So they just left the body out and then probably scavenged, and it's a rough environment.
Just being in the environment alone would like rip them apart, you'd think.
All the way up to 1929, Inuits told of finding crates of tin containers.
Wow.
So that's that's like so many years. Like there was a man, it was like 40 years ago, and he said it was an older man, Inuit man. He's like, we find crates with containers,
the tin
foods, and some of them are painted red and some aren't. But they were whole cans, like
not ever been opened. So they had food. Why are they starving? They went all crazy? They went mad and ate each other and started killing each other off.
And starved to death.
They
have food.
Weird.
In 1939, Canadian Arctic explorer Wilhelmer. It's VilhjaLmur.
Lots of consonants.
Stephenson. We'll just call him Stephenson.
Okay.
He wrote an essay. He was a renowned explorer of the Arctic. It's called The Lost Franklin Expedition. And he wondered how men armed with muskets all seemed to die so quickly from hunger when the Inuits survived for generations with only Stone Age weapons.
Right. You have guns.
He concluded that it was their refusal to adopt to the ways of the Inuit that made them die. Stephenson had survived for 7 years in the Arctic on fresh, raw meat. Only. That's all he ate was fresh, like.
Can you imagine if that's what you had to do? But whatever.
And people, when he printed this essay, people were like skeptical. Like, there's no way that you only ate raw meat and you didn't die for 7 years. So he performed an experiment. He was living in New York City. He ate only nothing but raw meat for a whole year while being medically monitored, and he remained perfectly healthy.
Wow.
The doctor said, because he was eating uncooked meat. That doesn't seem
I want to die.
If you're in the Arctic and
you have the option,
and you just killed the animal,
it's super fresh.
Eat it. Like, you just killed it. It was healthy. Eat it. You're going to the market and buying meat.
You don't know how long it's been there. Especially, when was this?
This was 1939.
Well, it's probably refrigeration better.
I'm a vegetarian personally, so I don't eat any meat. So I would die. I could not be.
Can you imagine the texture? The texture alone.
Warm sealed
blood.
Blubber.
But I guess I'm thinking of the Inuits. Probably that's like they don't know any different, so that's going to taste pretty decent for them.
Yeah, that's all they.
Yeah, like to them, that's good. Mm-hmm. But if you never have, then you're like, ugh.
Fast forward to mostly modern time. We're talking 1980-ish.
Okay.
Owen Beatty, he wrote the book that I got all my information from. It's called Frozen in Time, again, for those of you who missed it last week.
Yeah. Go listen to it if you did.
His last name is pronounced Beatty, not Beatty. I was wrong. He is the assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Alberta, and he planned a meticulous survey of King William Island in 1981 using forensic anthropology techniques. And the first year he went out there, he only found skeletal remains from one of the crew. That was it. Oh. But he knows, like, they were covered in an expansive area.
Okay.
So he's like, I need to go back. The remains that he found confirm the accounts of cannibalism, first off.
Oh, good. I mean, not good, but I'm glad that they're proof of it.
Yeah. There were cut marks in the bone indicating intentional dismemberment, and it was cut like a butcher would cut.
Okay.
The skull, which had no face. The only bones he found were leg, arm, and cranial bones.
Wow.
No facial bones. They were hack the face off, eat the brain out.
Oh, my God.
Yuck. they were all found, and they referred to it as the last resource because they're out of everything else. So
they had
dead.
food.
They did. Charles Dickens, who was an author at the time, refused to believe this about, like, when they posted it back in London.
He's like, no way.
Right? He refused to believe it, and he wrote out against it all the time. There's no way that our boys would eat each other.
Oh my God.
But Owen Beatty
nothing like blind nationalism, right?
He proves, like, his
I'm glad.
prove that they were
cannibals,
dismembered and eaten.
Yeah.
Yeah. In 1982, I've been used to saying 18.
Yeah.
He went back again to Prince William Island and collected many bones and other artifacts. He sent all the bones to be tested for trace element analysis. And they discovered that they tested the bones of 2 male and 1 female Inuit people from the area. And then all the other bones that were from the Europeans from the Franklin expedition.
Yep.
And the Franklin expedition remains were found to have high levels of lead. Perhaps some or all of the crew had been exposed to toxic levels of lead. We're talking, like, the Inuits had 22 to 36 parts per million of lead, which is low. Real low. The Franklin expedition bones, 228 parts per million.
Wow.
That's like
it's a tin food.
It's like so many times more of what the normal level was.
Right.
But he did the Inuit bones as a
comparison.
Because he's like, they live here. They don't run anywhere else. I want to know if something in the environment is poisoning them. But he said testing the bones isn't as accurate because this is from their whole life.
Right.
Like, it like builds up in your body. So
yeah, over
their
time.
Lifetime. So, like, it was the industrial age.
Yeah, it could have been
like
that.
Smog from coal. They were using a lot of coal, and that would give you lead poisoning too. Here's some of the what lead poisoning does to you.
Oh God!
If you have too much lead: anorexia, weakness and fatigue, irritability, stupor, paranoia, abdominal pain, anemia, pain in the joints and muscles, and it makes you look gray or white. It changes your appearance like drastically, lead poisoning. And it changes the color of your gums. They get like a black line.
Ew.
Which is similar to scurvy.
Right.
Scurvy makes your gums all gross.
Yeah.
So, like, on first inspection, you have scurvy. Because it's very similar, but it is different. It has, like, the paranoia and, like, the hallucinations that you get from lead poisoning. Might explain a lot.
Yeah.
The tins were in the preserved food in the tins. They use lead solder.
Of course they did.
To solder the
sides. Yes. It's like it seams together.
Right. But, I mean, you do it in the correct way, and it shouldn't expose a lot of lead.
But they were cheap, so they probably did.
They also, back in Victorian England, used lead glazed pottery as tableware. They stored, like, if you think about life on a ship, especially the officers, they're eating out of, like, pottery. Like,
right.
Fancy china, because...
They're fancy.
Right. And, like, storage of food, acidic foods in these lead glazed pottery, what happens is it dissolves the lead salts in the glaze into the food. So, lemon juice, wine, vinegar, pickles, all of that in a ceramic lead glazed dish.
We'll pull that right out.
Will dissolve the lead in the glaze into the food. So you're getting lead in your tin food. You're getting lead in your pottery. It makes sense, like, why so many officers died.
Yeah.
Percentage-wise.
Because they were using the lead-ridden stuff.
So, yeah. The tea and chocolate were also stored in containers lined with lead foil.
Jesus Christ.
You gotta use lead for everything.
Yeah.
You know? And they also found cups, like, discarded in the area with, like, other stuff from the expedition that the crew had made from the discarded food tins.
Oh,
so, like, they're recycling. These tins are making them into cups, like mugs.
Which you probably would, because it makes sense to reuse your resources.
They have all these tins, you might as well use them for something, right? By 1848, this expedition, 9 officers and 15 men had died. And that's a lot compared to, like, because, like, they shouldn't have had scurvy. They had all this provisions. Why did so many of them die? That's fast. That's really fast. The bones that they tested, they showed long-term, like we said, the lifetime exposure of lead, not short-term. So, like, they couldn't be
specific on when the poisoning happened.
Yeah, they can't say for precisely it came from what they were eating, but they could infer.
Well, yeah, because of all the evidence they had.
So, in August of 1983, Beattie and a small team went to Beachy Island, because they traveled all over Prince William Island. They went to all the places that all these other men had said they found stuff that said. And they're collecting bones, pieces, and artifacts. And they're like, we're not going to get what we need from this. We need an actual body.
Right.
So they went back to Beachy Island to examine what they hoped would be preserved remains from this expedition they knew were there.
Right.
Like, we have these 3 graves. It's on Beachy Island. How are they buried? Are they intact? They don't know. So, first one they dug up was John Torrington. They actually ended up exhuming all 3 men, but it took 2 trips. They had to do it in 2 different trips because of time. And he took an hour. It took them an hour just to remove the top 4 inches of gravel that were on the top surface. Once they reached the permafrost, they said it was described as cement-like.
Jesus.
And they were first trying to melt it with hot air, and that did not work. I could just see them sitting there with blow dryers.
I know.
It was the 80s, lots of blow dryers. They ended up using picks and shovels, and it took them 2 days to dig 5 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. Hot and cold water was then poured. Like, once they reached the coffin, I mean, this is an artifact. It's 150 years old. They have to preserve it because of all the laws of Canada, and they have to put the grave back exactly how it was. So it's archaeology. So they ended up using hot and cold water alternating, pouring over this coffin to thaw it out. Right. And it was, when they opened the lid, it was a solid block of ice. Jeez. They could kind of see in it. And, like, one of the first things that came out, like, that thawed out, were his feet. Kind of love that. So I wanted to quote, there's a quote in the book that I wanted to read. And again, this is out of the book Frozen in Time by Owen Beatty and John Geiger. Beattie. This just gives you a tone of how Beattie felt and how they all felt on this expedition. It's just like, really nice. It's like...
Start.
All stood, numb and silent. Nothing could have prepared them for the face of John Torrington, framed and cradled in his ice coffin. Despite all the intervening years, the young man's life did not seem far away. In many ways, it was as if Torrington had just died. It just, like, gives me goosebumps. Yeah. It's just, like, one of those... They were in awe of this. Like, it just, like, they had reverence for these men. And it was
over 100 years.
Right. To see this man's face just come out of the ice. It's just... He's like, you forget that it's a whole person.
Yeah.
I really recommend this book. Is great. You should get a copy of it. If you know me, I will lend it to you. Just ask me. I would be happy to lend it to you. It's wonderful. Anyway, as long as you don't mind reading nerdy stuff.
You wouldn't be listening to this, really, would you, if you didn't?
Right, for sure. Okay, and if you look up pictures, and we'll post some pictures, but there's pictures of this excavation and exhumation. You can easily find them on the internet. But, like, John Torrington, his face, like, his nose and part of his face were really dark, and it was because his face was covered by blue wool fabric. The color had leached into his face and stained his face.
So he was dyed blue.
So when you look at him, it almost looks like he had frostbite, but it was just from the fabric.
Gotcha.
And they said that when they were thawing out, like, when they were digging, this odd smell started to permeate the tent. And they're like, it didn't really smell like decomp, but it smelled like an organic kind of decay, and they couldn't really figure out what it was. But they said it was a good sign.
Oh, okay.
Because they're digging, and they're digging, and they're digging, and they're like, he was buried like 6 feet under. That's
crazy how they got him in there.
How those men chipped away the permafrost just to bury this man properly. It's
crazy.
It's like reverent. You know, it's like these men cared about each other. You know, they were
the ones that didn't eat each other did.
At the end, yeah. This was the beginning. It was the first year.
Oh, yeah. They still weren't eating each other yet.
They weren't eating each other yet. No. But, I mean, it just, like, goes to show, like, they were determined to give these men
proper burial.
Like, he was the one who was born in I think he was buried first.
Okay.
Like 6 months before the other two.
He was young.
He was 20?
Yeah.
Go back in my notes. It'll tell me.